was nuclear?
Close to 30% of electricity was nuclear.
Like
Yeah,
before,
I
like
wouldn't-
the
I guess that makes sense. And then there have been some other countries that would have changed a bunch from Fukushima. Like Germany shut down their nuclear. I don't think they brought it back on yet. So there were some ripple effects in places besides just Japan for sure. We'll get into this when we talk more about nuclear. So thanks for your work with those. So what's the important stuff? Obviously the fossil fuels, right? Huge. And then I do think it's important to know that behind the fossil fuels, right, nuclear is next, and then hydro, and then everything else. So not like memorizing the percents, I mean they change from year to year, but I think that level, all the fossil fuels is the vast majority, then nuclear, then hydro, then other stuff. It should be sufficient to answer most questions you might get about that objective. Emily?
I forgot to mention, but because Portugal is bordered by a lot of water, it also has like 14% hydropower.
14% hydro, okay. Yeah, so that's significantly different. And I wonder if that's rivers or tides. When we look at hydro in a couple of weeks, I mean, rivers and tides, like same deal. We don't really treat them any differently. There's some minor differences, but that would be interesting to know. So we want to do a first run through at advantages and disadvantages of these different electricity generating sources. We're not going to care about the transportation and the heating aspects, right? This topic is about electricity production and then consequences of the ways that we produce electricity. So what the factors we do want to consider when thinking about advantages and disadvantages, we want to care about greenhouse gas emissions, right? Climate change is real, it is happening. Even this syllabus that was written 9 years ago maybe comes an ounce short of saying that yes, it's absolutely happening, but only an ounce short, and that was 9 years ago. So greenhouse gas emissions, we definitely want to consider. Any risks to human health or human life, we want to consider. Other environmental effects that don't necessarily risk human health or human life, we can acknowledge as well. Renewable or non-renewable is something that should come up in our advantage-disadvantage discussions. The expense of the fuel is worthy of coming up. The energy density of the fuel is something we want to look at for advantages, disadvantages. Whether or not that type of energy is available like all the time is significant. For instance, like solar, can't do much with solar at night. Right, so that limits what you're able to do with it. And then the thing that we don't really want to talk about with advantages or disadvantages is how much it costs to like build the plant in the first place. Right? We don't really want to look at those infrastructure arguments. The fuel arguments are okay, but not the cost of the apparatuses themselves. I think that's short-sighted, but I mean that's what I see on mark schemes. All right, so you have space already for all of our types of energy sources. Let me get organized while I'm getting organized. Maybe in your foursomes, can you try and do just one advantage, one disadvantage for each, right, to get started? And maybe that should only take, well, let me only give you 2 minutes to do that. Right? One advantage, one disadvantage for each, and then I'll definitely be organized by the time you're done with that.
Releases CO2 into the atmosphere. CO2 is bad. Environmental effect of CO2 is changing the pH of the ocean. CO2 actually advantages. It's easy to get. It's not much. Not as much as the wind.
It's still there.
All right, 15 more seconds.
What's the disadvantage of oil?
Disadvantage, it's like the worst thing of the time.
Oh yeah, so we have a disadvantage.
And coal mines are dangerous.
Okay.
Those are the US.
All right, so I'm gonna. I don't want to get. I don't want to get 5 things for each, right? I want to go faster than that today. We'll go more slowly. Maybe for fossil fuels, we'll do a few more since we're hoping to be done with that in like next class. So I've got disadvantages on the left, advantages on the right. Let's start off with disadvantages of oil. Back there, anybody? Non-renewable, absolutely, right? So I did a legend up there for the stuff that's going to keep cropping up, so that's an N. Another disadvantage, maybe you guys up here? All right, other disadvantages of oil, Paul?
Releases CO2.
Yeah, greenhouse gases, absolutely.
Do
Any
we
other,
need to say what they do?
what's that?
Do we need to say what they do?
We need to say what the greenhouse gases, what they do? No. Any, maybe one other for oil disadvantage? Justin?
Like high value or expensive.
Is that true? Is oil expensive? Now oil, crude oil, should be cheaper than gasoline because gasoline has to be refined from crude oil.
Yeah.
But let's just use gasoline as our kind of measure of how much oil costs. How much does a gallon of gasoline cost?
$3.37.
Let's just do one significant digit.
$4.
$3 for a gallon. And remember, crude oil is going to be cheaper than we pay at the pump. Nobody has a bottle of water. How much is like what's like the most common size of like little like Poland Spring water bottle you buy? How many?
8
No.
Oh, 500 milliliters. 500 milliliters.
12 or 16. What is it?
16 point.
16 point.
Yeah, 16 ounces.
16.9 or
And
5.
that's a pint.
No, it's 500 milliliters. It's in milliliters.
All right, whatever. So picture the most common like size bottle of water you would buy at the store. How many of those would fit in a gallon of milk?
8.
So somebody confidently said 8, so I'll take your word for that. How much does one of those small bottles of water cost at like 7-Eleven or at the gas station?
$1.
$1? Okay. So $1, but you said there was 8 of those that would make up a gallon? Well, let's all right, fine. So what is that? $8 a gallon for water?
Well,
Versus $3 a gallon.
you buy a physical gallon. Like you could, they also sell like just a gallon of
Fine.
water,
What does that cost?
like
$1.
at $2.
$2. Don't tell me it costs $1, because why would you go to 7-Eleven and buy the 16 ounce bean and buy a gallon?
Pathmark, you can
Paying for
get
I'm not talking, I didn't ask about Pathmark. Fine, let's just say $2 a gallon. I think that's ridiculous. I think we should use the size that people are buying, right?
Yeah.
People go into 7-Eleven, they don't buy a gallon, whatever. But I'll succumb to you. $2 a gallon for water, $3 a gallon for gasoline. Crude oil is cheaper than gasoline. I'm sorry, no, oil is not expensive. And the oil company doesn't buy in gallon increments either. They buy at least in barrels, which is like 55 gallons. So no, I'm sorry, I'm not going to put expensive for oil. If anything, it's cheap. All right, other advantages of oil. Robbie.
High energy density.
Relatively high energy density. Fine. Anything else that anybody thinks is major about disadvantages or advantages of oil? How about human health? How about environmental damage?
Oh,
Yeah.
environmental damage.
Yeah, I mean, we don't go more than a few years without some huge leak of oil into a body of water or land, right? So, yeah, some significant environmental consequences. Not by default.
Disadvantage.
Sorry, don't tell Mrs. Alvarez. Yeah, so we had, even just in this, we don't even usually hear about these things if they don't happen in the U.S. We had the Gulf oil spill, right, 3 years ago? It wasn't that long ago.
Yeah.
That was huge. We had Exxon Valdez, we still talk about that. That was 25 years ago, 28 years ago. Still talk about that. There's still damage from that. And there's ones that happen all over the world that we don't even hear about. All right, natural gas. So a lot of the stuff is still going to apply. Natural gas, it's non-renewable, right? Greenhouse gases. Environmental damage, well, not as bad as oil. If we do have a major leak, yeah, it messes up the air quality for a few days, few weeks, few months maybe. Doesn't linger for decades like the oil will. So maybe environmentally not quite as bad. Natural gas is pretty cheap. Energy density is higher than oil, right? And I'm going to put as another advantage for natural gas that it burns pretty darn clean. When we burn oil, or when we burn coal especially, we get lots of stuff besides just carbon dioxide. Natural gas, not so much. So it burns pretty clean. Anything else anybody wants to comment on in terms of an advantage or disadvantage of oil or natural gas? Paul?
Well, for natural gas,
Yeah.
to get it out of like the ground, don't they like flush the mine out with water and stuff?
The classic way of getting natural gas out of the ground is exactly the same as oil, and they get them together, they're found in the same places. We do some, and this will come up a little later in the period, we more recently do some special stuff to try and get natural gas out of places that don't have a whole lot underground. But that's not inherent to the fuel. I had one other thing. All right. Coal, non-renewable for sure, greenhouse gases for sure. Not the same environmental problems associated with oil, but I'm going to say burns dirty as a new disadvantage. Burns very dirty. Is it cheap?
Yeah.
It's like cheaper than dirt. It's literally, I mean, if you go to Home Depot, you buy a big bag of soil, coal would be like 1/10 of the cost of that. So I'm going to say, you could probably buy a pickup truck full for like, I don't know, $40. Like super cheap. How about energy density? No, it's not good energy density. It was the lowest of our fossil fuels. It was about 2.5 times lower than natural gas. I'm just not going to really include that as an advantage or a disadvantage, and certainly doesn't burn clean. Paul?
Well, like mines in third world countries could be dangerous too.
Yeah. Yeah, so the mine, yes, so human, in terms of risk to human life, more serious consequences than the others. Human health too, I mean, even in terms of the mining. But Paul's right, you do hear, I feel like it was every year for a while, you heard about coal miners getting trapped or, dying in collapses. I feel like it's been a couple of years now. The last one I remember hearing was
Mexico, right?
it was in South America somewhere. But the reason I remember hearing about it, when is the New York Marathon? Is that in like October, September?
Yeah, October, November.
I think like a year ago, like a year and a half ago. So those miners in Peru were down there for like at least a month. But we were able to get them like supplies. They got out, and a couple of them came like to the New York Marathon. So it must have been within the last 3 years.
It was when I was in
Chile, I don't know. Sorry, that's like very jingoistic of me. All right, well, we gotta keep going. Hydro. Disadvantages of hydro. Robbie.
Low energy density.
Okay, sure. Justin.
I was going to say not as efficient.
No, actually, it's extremely efficient. In fact, I'll go ahead and immediately put that up here for advantage. You need to devastate the ecosystem in order to use hydroelectric. You need to just totally change the ecosystem. I can't think of any other disadvantages. Other advantages of hydro besides efficient, Elizabeth? Renewable, absolutely. Right? No greenhouse gases. Anything else for advantages? I can think of one. Yeah?
No emissions.
No emissions at all, right? So no air quality problems, Cliff.
You need a renewable, like
Yeah, so you might be a little bit geographically limited. That might go under disadvantage really more than anything. Nick?
It's free after you build it?
Yeah, the fuel is free, right? Free fuel. There are wars sometimes over whose water it is, but all right, wind. Disadvantages wind. Colin.
I was gonna say, did you mean to have nuclear out there too?
Oh my gosh, yeah. Thank you. All right, disadvantages wind. Paul,
Environmental.
tell me more.
Disrupt birds. Maybe. They like fly to the
The
turbine.
early ones did chop up birds a little bit.
That's what I've
So
heard.
the more modern ones actually rotate pretty slow,
Oh,
even when it's really windy. So I don't want to hear that. I don't want you to put that on something. It used to be a real problem. I don't think it's a real problem anymore. Yeah, Nick.
It's not always windy out.
Okay, not always windy. So, in addition to being geographically limited, even in the places where it is usually windy, it might not always be windy, sure. Are other disadvantages for wind, Robbie?
Low energy density.
Fine.
It's my go-to.
I believe just within the last couple of weeks, like the New Jersey legislature made a decision to like cancel some plans to allow to permit some wind farms. How come? How come, Nick?
Oh, I wasn't gonna say anything about that, but I was gonna say it's pretty much free after you make it.
Yeah, we're not on advantages yet, David.
They're really loud.
There's some noise. I've heard. I haven't been close enough to them to hear that myself, but I've heard that there's some noise. But more importantly, or less importantly, some people just think they're ugly, right? So we said Portugal does wind because they're a coastal country. We're a coastal state, right? We could absolutely do wind at the beaches or even offshore a mile. There was an experimental wind farm off the coast of Atlantic City. That's where the company that was experimenting wanted to do it. But you could still see the stupid little things, even though they're a mile away. You can see them from the beach, and I guess we don't want. I think they look cool, but I guess I'm weird. All right, advantages. Yeah, right. I think they're prettier than the solar panels if they're synced.
No, because the light is.
So let's finish up. We're gonna revisit all these things again anyway. Let's finish up. Renewable. What else? Advantages. Yeah, Elizabeth. Right. So there's really other than a couple of weirdo air pressure pollution, like air pressure problems. There's no air pollution. There's no water pollution. So yeah, there's certainly no emissions. So yeah, I think we can say environmental advantages. How about the other one? Yeah, free. Right? How did that show up? Oh, I did say free. Yeah, free fuel. All right, solar. Yeah, Sarah.
Aren't they really expensive to make though?
Oh, we're not allowed to look at that.
Oh no.
You know, I wonder that same thing, and I've looked into it a little bit just because for some reason I look at a wind turbine and I'm like, that thing's got to be expensive to make. But I've looked into it a little bit and it seems like, yeah, it is, but they actually last for a pretty darn long time and can produce a lot of electricity. So I actually think like pound for pound, it's not bad in comparison to other things. Paul?
Efficiency.
For wind or for solar?
Oh, I thought we were on solar.
Yeah, we are on solar.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they're not very efficient at all. Not only that, but we're actually talking about pretty tiny energy densities. Justin?
They take up a lot of space as a result.
Yeah, because of the low energy density, we need huge surface areas covered by these things to produce reasonable amounts of energy. Any other disadvantages of solar? Yes.
It's not always night.
Right. So.
I mean, day. Yeah.
Right.
It's not always
there's
night.
not always sun. Right, it's not always sunny. Nobody watches that one?
It's always sunny.
It's
Yeah,
always
Philadelphia, right? It's not always sunny.
No, it is always sunny in Philadelphia.
It is, of course it is. All right, advantages. Renewable, right? Yeah.
Like the potential is really,
What does that mean? The potential is really good.
we could eventually develop technology that can capture
Yeah, I think we can say that about pretty much all of these things. And I don't know that the technology is going to get much better for these. I think it will keep getting cheaper. Know that we're going to get a whole lot more efficient. I could be wrong. Cassie?
I don't really know how to phrase this, but like they have like portable solar chargers you can like charge like electronics with.
Okay.
Or maybe like on big farms.
Okay.
Convenience?
Yeah, I don't know how to I don't know how to say that either.
Convenience, maybe?
How about you can use it?
Anyway.
Yeah, we'll just save that for second go around. We can save that for the second go around. Robbie, Emily, and then I want to move.
Free fuel.
Free, right. The line is free. Emily, same thing?
I was actually going to say convenient,
What does that mean?
like what Cassie said.
I mean, what are you thinking about, like calculators? Is that what you're thinking about?
Well, no, because they have like chargers that like you can plug in a USB port after leaving out in the sun and charge your
They have like they have iPhone things that are
And
like
it works?
yeah, there's like iPhone cases that you can put on.
I feel like that's like my flashlight you have to shake. All right, whatever, fine. And other advantages, I don't know.
No emissions.
No, yeah, well, sure.
Sure.
All right, I'm going to skip waves because we don't really do it. Nuclear we absolutely have to address, and then we'll get back into our fossil fuel objectives. All right, so let's actually start with advantages this time. Let's get some new people. Some of you haven't given me a single thing. Kelly.
High energy.
Yeah, like not even just high, like exponentially larger energy density than all the other stuff. Other advantages. Yeah?
There's lots of uranium.
Uranium isn't super rare. Yeah, I'm not going to write that down. I don't know that I'd want us to ever put that as an answer, but it's not super rare. All right, let's jump to disadvantages. Well, hold on. No, hold on. No greenhouse gas emissions. We should acknowledge. Yeah, that's fine. Disadvantages. Leia. Say it again. Okay, non-renewable. Tessa?
Is nuclear waste one
Yeah, so we talked about this already. The fission products, many of them are highly radioactive. So we have this really radioactive waste that we should do something with. At a minimum, we need to care about it. So that's a disadvantage for sure. That would not be a disadvantage of fusion, but we're not doing fusion. Robbie?
It's potentially very dangerous.
What do you mean by that?
If like you have like for instance the nuclear plant meltdowns where like all proper
Okay.
procedures are not followed and taking care of like the high energy being created.
So how many meltdowns have occurred in the 50 years we've been doing this?
At least two. Well, I think like two big ones. Three. Because there's-
3 Mile.
yeah, but the two that happened are like so
Two for
significant.
sure. All right. How many verified deaths as a result of those two meltdowns?
200.
No, not even 100.
Less.
No, like dozens maybe. How many accepted illnesses / yeah, like who knows? Maybe thousands, tens of thousands, maybe. That's both of those numbers are going to be way less than these for sure. So I think the real risk of death and illness, no, not in comparison to our fossil fuels, but I do agree that there is a perceived risk of illness and death and terrible things. So I'm just going to say perceived risks is a very real disadvantage. All right, so I think that's a good first run through. We are going to look at some additional advantages and disadvantages probably today of not so much burning these things, but transporting, storing, extracting, and then all these other things we'll come back to at a later date. So our next objective, at least the next one that I'm going to tackle, is the one that said something about the history of industry and how that led to the widespread use of fossil fuels. So when did the Industrial Revolution happen? You guys probably studied that.
1800s.
Is that right? So there's some other hands. Is that right?
1890.
All right, so I'm not getting disagreement. So fine, so 1800s, there were some major changes. So before maybe significantly before the 1800s, right, most power, most of the world energy came from animals, right? Transportation, plowing fields, like whatever. The major energy source of the world, like 400 years ago, was animals. But that was supplemented by some things. We've had windmills since, I don't know, I remember reading Don Quixote that was set in the 1600s, I think, and he was fighting windmills. So we've had windmills at least that long, probably longer. We've had we've had water mills for hundreds of years. I think Millstone is named after water mills. Was the Tinton Falls, at the Tinton Falls, there's a restaurant that I drove by recently. It was called MJ's, but it used to be called the Grist Mill, right? Because they had a water mill right there. So we've been using water power for a while. And then we used to use like huge sailing ships for transportation as well. All right, so that was like hundreds of years ago. Then we had this Industrial Revolution. We started using steam engines to do things. Later on, internal combustion engines. And we needed a higher energy density fuel than the stuff up here in order to take advantage of those new technologies. So the higher energy density fuels that we needed were the oil and the coal, and maybe to smaller extents, like, it's like whale, no, I don't think whale blubber was ever used for engines. It was used for like lighting purposes. But we needed these higher energy density fuels, and we had fossil fuels to do that with. So that's kind of why we started using those all over the place. Most areas of the world do have fossil fuel reserves. If not oil and gas, then certainly coal. So the fuels were abundant, and we needed something more energy dense than these other ones. All right, I don't really quite know what that objective wanted us to say, but hopefully we got it there. Before we move on, I'd like to very briefly look at why oil and natural gas are underground, and then give some hints to how we find them and then extract them underground. All right, so this is, I'm going to have to be careful here. I could do a whole semester on this. I got to be careful to try and do 5 minutes tops. What are these different patterns supposed to be down here? These are supposed to be like rock units, right? So this was like the surface of the Earth, and then here we've like gone down into the Earth. And all of the rock units here represent sedimentary rocks. There are two other rock types also that I'm sure you had to learn about in, I don't know, 6th grade, 4th grade, something like that. What are they? Igneous and metamorphic. No, not the novel. Metamorphic. Alright, so igneous rocks are ones that like solidified from like magma, right? So we sometimes think volcanoes, but actually volcanoes don't really make igneous rocks. They can, but most of it forms underground or underwater. So igneous, what used to be molten, solidified. We're going to find fossil fuels in there? No, no, because it's like hot, right? Fossil fuels burn, right? Or at least can evaporate really easily. So if we did have fossil fuels in that stuff, it wouldn't stay there because of the high temperatures. Sedimentary rocks are rocks that formed from, well, sediments, clays, silts, sands that settled out in water, layered up on the bottom of water and then got buried and turned into rock. And then metamorphic rocks are either of these types that got buried, super buried, and due to high pressures and high temperatures, right, the mineralogy got changed. Right? We're not going to find fossil fuels in those either. If we did have organic remains in that stuff as we got buried and got real hot, real pressure, that stuff would have gotten cooked also. So when we're talking about fossil fuels, we're only talking about sedimentary rocks. Follow-up questions on that before we